Okay, this video we are going to cover workbook connections, pulling in external data, and then utilizing pivot tables based on those. Now, for the tools that we're building for analysis, this is going to be the most common, and here's why. So you could have just static data, which usually comes from somebody else, or a report that is you just pull daily or something, and then you do this ad hoc analysis. And that is very repetitive and probably can be automated, and if you can, you're going to want to do that. Sometimes you can't avoid it, and when you can't avoid it, you probably can't see it coming either. You don't know when higher headquarters is going to send you a specific task or that isn't something you've done before. And then also, the next one we're going to do, this external only, that's if the data that you're connecting to is already, for the lack of a better word, perfect. You don't have to do anything to it. You just connect to it and boom, you're ready to go. So be like in a server, or somebody built you a cool access database or something with all the calculated fields and transformations that you already need. But for our purposes and for the scope at, let's say, a typical wing level, we're going to need to pull in data through data connections and then manipulate it in some fashion so we can connect it to our pivot table, and that's what I'm going to show you here. So in terms of data connections, if I go to the data tab and connections, you can see there's nothing here. So we're going to have to find a way to bring in our data. Now, we could do from an Access database, we could do it from the web actually, if you may have done that before. If you haven't, but you can go out to the web. You can do it from a text file, from other sources, so you can do it from a SQL Server, some of these bigger cloud-based services. You can actually do your own queries. You can do like an inner join query with the Microsoft query feature. But typically, you're going to do existing connection. It's going to come up with this. There's some connections on this computer. There's nothing on the network I can connect to that I can find, and connections in this workbook, none. So I'm going to browse for more. My desktop to the data integration folder where I'm kind of putting this out there. Video tutorials, Excel pivot tables, data used in these tutorials. So you can just imagine that this is what you do at your home station. You would come in and navigate this file path. So I'm going to go to the Arrows Workday execution data, and it goes out and sees that. Expand this here so we can look at it. It says, hey, it's a table created whenever it was created and then modified last on this date. But the most important thing is that, hey, it recognizes the data here. It says this is what it is. Now, if there were more than one table, you would have a list to choose from. You could not do multiple in this fashion, but you would choose the one you want. So we want this one. The first row does contain headers. If the data did not come with the starting in the first cell, you would want to get into that table and delete until it started in A1. So I'm going to hit OK. It says, how do you want to pull it in? Now, the external only, we're going to look at pulling it in as a pivot because that data is presumably perfect already. But we're going to pull the data in as a table so that we can start to manipulate it and hit OK. It says getting data, does it very quickly. It has my table name up here. I go back to the data tab and properties. Now we have table properties that we're looking at here, and now we have if we're to click properties usage, we can do refreshing or definition. Now this is the important part because this is where it can throw people off as well with your pivot tables. Everything's working great and then something goes wrong and people freak out. So if I expand this out, this is the file path that I use. So from where my tool is right now, this workbook, I had to go through this file path: users, my account, desktop, data integration, so on and so forth, until I found my actual data. The other thing that's important here is this is the name, the command text, the name of that table, and so it changes. So arrows, it's going to name it for you. Deems, it's going to name it for you. When you go to Chris, it it's the name of your query. So if you go into Chris and you name the query something, and then you send your buddy a query and then they rename it and think this is all just going to work well, it's not. It's going to change the file path. It's going to change where this thinks it's getting its data from, and it's going to break. So you want to ensure that if you have to have consistency in query names like Chris, that you want to make sure there is that consistency. And just be aware that that's where that's coming from. There's other things that are going on here, or depending on the type of queries you have, but Excel to Excel, you create it and it lives in your data connections up here, and now we have workable data. So let's go ahead and create a pivot table. I'm going to hit Alt NV to create my pivot table in an existing workbook, because that's what I have this tab for. Put it right in A1 and hit OK. This is my arrows data, so let's just go ahead and start with Work Center. Here we go. Let me go ahead and get committed days. And yep, remember we got to do design, we got to do report layout, show in tabular, turn off grand totals, turn off subtotals, and look what we got going on here. So if I select this here, remember it should add things for me down here. Count 7. Well, I've selected 7 cells, but these are supposed to be committed days. What's going on? So it's like we talked about before. This is exactly why we pull in a workbook connection. Work with the data in the right scope, where you're not having a huge data or something. Working with it in the workbook is just an easy way to do it. Works very well, and you can get comfortable with it because you have it all in front of you. So what we have to do here is a quick transformation, and here's where table comes in. I'm going to type in commit days. Alright, commit days, and I want to use a formula called values. And what value does is converts text to a string. Now if you watch the status of funds video series, we kind of go through this as well, but when we're talking about pivot tables, this all makes a huge difference. So let me zoom out real quick. So committed days, where are we at? Right here, right? So align to the left, align to the right. We want them aligned to the right. So I'm going to do obligated days. Expand that out, and let's do balance. So I will do the same thing, value of obligated days, and then I'm going to do value of balance of days. And it looks like I forgot one of my columns, issue days. So equals VAL tab. Go to the left here. Issued days. Okay, so they're aligned to the right. Let's go back to our pivot table now. Remember, this is a cache. If I scroll down, I created these 4 columns in the data. I created these. You just saw me do it, but it's not in my pivot table. And you see here where these are text and it sits in the rows, because it's like, these are not values, dude. We're not going to values as a default. So let me refresh this pivot cache. Alright, and now when I scroll down, there are my new fields. They just appeared, the cache refreshed, the table did its job, it expanded dynamically. I didn't have to reselect everything. It just knows that I wanted it to be part of the data. So if I go in here and select commit day now we're in the value field settings. So just looking at it, you go, what's going on? Why is this not working properly? If I were to total here and do a grand total or a subtotal, I've got an actual total, and this here doesn't even total because it's not going to total text. So let's take that committed days out of there and obligated balance, and let's throw issued right on top. Alright, perfect. So now we have a pivot table based on a data connection. So that's a really good thing. Now, just like we saw here, if we were to come into our this is where I selected it from, this Workday's execution. Let me open this up. Locked for editing. You see how that is? I've got an I've got an open connection to my workbook. It's locked for editing because it's connected to this table, and it's saying you can open as read-only, but I'm not going to let you modify it while I have this open connection. So I'm going to hit cancel. But let me give you another example. If this were to come in here and that raw data change, so I'm going to go to arrows, I'm going to update it, and then I'm going to pull this back in. If this connection refreshes, so I can go to data table, refresh, and then this table to refresh, see it just pulled in the data again. Now that's an important point as well. That underlying data, this data, it does not have these 4 columns I just built in there, right? It has these right here that are coming in as text, but because this table is dynamic, I have that link. It's going to refresh, and all that value functions recalculated when I refresh the table. So let me do another thing here with the pivot table. So that's pretty cool. That's a great thing, and that's why we do workbook connections, pull the data in so we can manipulate it. Another thing, let's say things change. I gotta go in and I got a workday document. I change stuff. I'm gonna do, let's say they issued me a total of 600 days now. I don't even know what let me see where this is. Let's make it ridiculous actually. 60,000. Alright, just so that we can see this happen. You can see this already updated, but again my pivot cache is not updated. It's not a real-time streaming type of thing. So let me right click and refresh. Oh, there it is right there, 60 something thousand. Alright, so that's the automation we can gain. And if I were to refresh and pull the actual data that's sitting there behind the scenes, it goes back to 36, this goes to 36, my pivot table will refresh and goes back to what it should be. So that's that type of automation we're looking for. In the next video, we'll follow on a little bit more with other workbook connections. We'll pull something in from an Access database, and then we'll move on to external tables.